Greetings. By virtue of your presence watching this video today, I want you to know that we consider you to be an extended member of our family at Unity in Linwood. We believe that you are an individualized expression of that one creative impetus which stands behind all life, and as such we celebrate the uniqueness which you are, and we celebrate our unity with you. We are glad you're with us.
Good morning, Unity in Linwood. Good morning, Unity in Linwood. Good morning, Unity in Linwood. How good is it to be all together again? Merry Christmas. Merry Christmas. I'd love to invite you to grab an adult education flyer on your way out of the sanctuary this morning. I will begin Unity Basics on the first Tuesday of January at 7 o'clock p.m. It's drawn from the book The Five Principles by Reverend Ellen Debenport. Your faculty for the year includes myself, Reverend Nina Clark, Mother Kathy Chalmers, Rabbi Ted Falcon, licensed Unity teachers Barbara Thorpe, Jack Eckram, Angela Eckram, and more. It promises to be a very, very good year. And every service has an ambassador. This person's role and responsibility is to support you in your exploration and discovery of this ever-evolving divine idea we call Unity in Linwood. So if you have a question about what's available to you, about what we believe, about what we teach, please engage her in conversation. Her name is Nan Allen. Would you put a face to that name, please, young lady? Practical spirituality, welcoming community. It is our admittedly short mission statement yet again, and always I believe it speaks volumes. Take a deep breath. Every week I like to support this mission statement with one of the sentences that we created together in collaboration with your Board of Trustees beginning in late 2014. This morning's reads as follows: we welcome people from all spiritual traditions and from no spiritual tradition whatsoever into every activity of our community. Fair enough? Mr. Fillmore always began teaching with an invocation. If you feel so inclined, please repeat after me. I am. I am now. I am now in the presence of pure being. And immersed in the Holy Spirit of life, love, and wisdom. I acknowledge your presence and your power. O blessed Spirit, in your divine wisdom, now remove my mortal limitations, and from your pure substance of love, bring into manifestation my world according to your perfect law. Five stories. The Magi were not those three kings of Orient you crooned about during those Christmas pageants at your local Methodist church back in the 70s, although those are incredibly fond memories for me. But the Magi were an unspecified number of seers. I like to think of them as mystical visionaries from lands referenced so vaguely that I would caution against any language more specific than the lands of the rising sun. Now, Mr. Fillmore would offer that a star might be symbolic of something of a prophetic experience, something of a psychic revelation, and that makes some sense to me. So if it makes some sense to you, then perhaps we can agree that these mystical visionaries experience something of a deep spiritual knowing. And these Magi, these mystical visionaries, were unlikely recipients, really, for this deep spiritual knowing. They were Gentiles in a story that is distinctly Jewish. And yet they followed that star even when it made no sense. After all, stars don't usually stop and start and change direction. They followed that star even when it faded from their sight. They followed that star even when they had to stop and ask for directions. They followed that star even when it placed them in grave danger, which it did. And not only did they follow that deep spiritual knowing, not only did they follow that star, they carried gifts of gold and frankincense and myrrh. They carried gifts which were among those offered by the king to Apollo at the temple, gifts which were offered by the Queen of Sheba to Solomon and Israel, gifts, you understand, which were common to royalty. Given this, I think it can be said that these magi, that these mystical visionaries trusted and embraced the value that was promised by that star, the value promised by their deep spiritual knowing. So I like to think that the tale of these magi, of these mystical visionaries, could be themed as, yes, we will follow. We will follow. And for the shepherds who, as the second story tells us, kept watch by night, for these simple, honest, uneducated, hardworking peasants, completely lacking in modern sophistication, it was in the deep darkness that the angel of light came. And again, let us look beyond that model of angels as set forth by Hollywood, that Patrick Swayze brand of angel, which would give pottery lessons to distraught lovers. In Unity, rather, we might consider an angel to be a spiritual thought, a divine idea, something of an inspiration, usually having little, if anything, to do with pottery. So we might conclude that it was in the deep darkness that the spiritual thought, that the divine inspiration, it was in the deep darkness that another brand of deep spiritual knowing came. And how poetic is it that a deep spiritual knowing comes in ways that each of us can understand. For the Magi, it was a star. For the shepherds, an angel. Nonetheless, even though the angel reassured them, "Be not afraid," these shepherds trembled. And so it was that the shepherds responded one by one to this deep spiritual knowing by saying, "Well, I will go, but you'll have to give me time to lose some weight." You know, I think I'd prefer a spiritual thought that's a little closer to home. I think I'd prefer a divine inspiration that's a little more convenient. Of course not. Rather, I like to think that the tale of these shepherds could be themed as yes, we will go. We will go. And in our third story, we find our Joseph. Now, he's described in the Gospels as a tekton. It's a Greek word that's often interpreted to mean carpenter. A better interpretation would be something akin to an artisan working in wood or iron or stone. But beyond this, we know very little about our Joseph. After all, he's never quoted. Beyond his nativity narrative, his name never appears again. And while there's a reference to Jesus' parents in the story of the temple, Christian tradition would otherwise extend Mary as a widow. Even so, it was as it was with our shepherds, so it was with our Joseph. We might say that in a darkness of a different ilk, after all, his beloved Mary was pregnant, he wasn't the father. So in a darkness of a different ilk, the angel came. In a darkness of a different ilk, our Joseph received a deep spiritual knowing. And again, the angel's counsel began with, "Be not afraid." And upon waking, our Joseph obeyed the angel's counsel like the Magi and the shepherds. Perhaps we can say that upon awakening, our Joseph obeyed that deep spiritual knowing. I like to think that the tale of our Joseph could be themed as, yes, I will obey. Now, while this annunciation, as it's called was Joseph's in the tale as recorded by Matthew. The Annunciation was Mary's in the tale as recorded by Luke. And like our shepherds and our Joseph, this young peasant girl heard that angel. Again, it might be said that she had something of a deep spiritual knowing. And you might now predict that the angel opened its assurance with, "Be not afraid, be not afraid." And I love the fact that these angels began with what would become the most often repeated phrase in the entirety of the Judeo-Christian Bible, "Be not afraid." For moments of deep spiritual knowing are no respecters of your comfort. They're no respecters of your routine. They're no respecters of your convenience, and they are certainly no respecters of your popularity. Moments of deep spiritual knowing would pull us to the edges of what we have believed to be possible, to the edges of what we believe to be true, to the edges of even what we believe to be desirable, and then kick us into an unknowable abyss of soul growth, development, and unfoldment. You see, the angels offer this, "Be not afraid," because the spiritual path requires great courage. And this courage was demonstrated by young Mary in our fourth story. For instead of arguing, "But I'm too young," instead of arguing, "I'm too poor," instead of arguing, "Well, I'm far too single," all of which would have been excellent arguments by all worldly accounts, instead of arguing against that deep spiritual knowing, young Mary responds in what I think is a pinnacle moment of her nativity, with her nativity narrative, with, "Let it be. Let it be." Now, my encouragement of past weeks has been to experience these stories of the Nativity with a new lens, not with today's post-Enlightenment lens, which would assign value based upon factuality, but with something of yesterday's pre-Enlightenment lens that would assign value based upon truth. For it deserves to be understood that Jesus himself and the early Jewish and Jewish Christian followers who offered these accounts, the earlier followers of the way, as they might have been known, were parabolic teachers who told stories of truth, not stories of factuality, in keeping with the traditions of their ancestors and their ancestors' ancestors. It deserves to be understood that the factuality of arks and ladders and giants and whales and good Samaritans was at the very most secondary to the truths which these writers sought to impart. So my encouragement of past weeks has been to experience the stories of the nativity narrative with a lens that would set aside divisive conversations about the factuality of stars which stumble impossibly through the night sky, nomadic magi, prophetic angels, and virgin births, for inclusive conversations about truth, profound truths which we can draw from all of the above stories regardless of their factuality. For not only do I think it deserves to be understood that the factuality was at best secondary to the truth, I think it also deserves to be understood that the inappropriate literalization of parabolic teachings introduces a psychic pain, especially to our young people who cannot reconcile what they perceive as being requested with what they perceive as being possible. The inappropriate literalization of parabolic teachings so distances humanity from the value which these stories offer to daily living that the value remains beyond any practical reach. It corners us with such tense inevitabilities as, well, if I can't walk on water, then what's the use? It leaves us searching for shrouds and ships instead of seeking for substance and soul. So in short, my encouragement of past weeks has been to find ourselves in these narratives, understanding that to find ourselves in these narratives is to find ourselves willing to explore, perceptions of self, of world, of God, of truth, in accord with what the writers would have wanted us to do. And as become willing to accept this encouragement, we find ourselves in new conversations about these narratives. No longer narratives about ancient events and distant lands, but narratives about what happens when that angel I lost my place, forgive me. Narratives about what happens when that star of higher possibility appears. Narratives about what happens when that angel of higher possibility appears, which would have us answer for ourselves. Will we respond to our moments of deep spiritual knowing with the countless sensible arguments of race consciousness? You want me to walk across the desert carrying what? But I'm just a lowly shepherd, but I'm too young, I'm too poor, I'm too single. Will we acquiesce to the comfortable responses born of the limitations of our histories, the expectations of our circles, the probabilities of our potentials? Or will we respond as our Magi did, as our shepherds did, as our Joseph did, as our beloved Mary did, narratives which would have us answer for ourselves? Will we offer that moment of willingness, that moment of permission, that moment of availability? Will we offer that moment of cosmic yesness, a moment which stands as the stern gatekeeper between transcendent and transient in all would-be tales of glory? And I think that's what we have here. We have a story of higher possibility, that Christ idea, and those who are willing to say yes, even against all worldly odds. So if the Christmas stories aren't provocative, if the Christmas stories aren't frustrating, perhaps I haven't communicated well. For ultimately, the Christmas stories are those of higher possibility converging with cosmic yesness. And where can higher possibility converge with cosmic yesness, if not right here? And when could higher possibility converge with cosmic yesness, if not right now? You see, that fifth story is ours to write. And while our shadowed history would have us continue to write the story about Jesus alone, any illumined future demands that we begin to write the story about us together. A story that Jesus just did really well. It's a universal story that has neither beginning nor ending, a universal story that belongs to no one people, a universal story about all who would stand in bigotry but hear the angels whisper of equality, all who would stand in greed but hear the angels whisper of generosity, all who would stand in separation but hear the angels whisper of oneness, all who would stand in limitation and hear the angels whisper of possibility, all who would stand in despair but hear the angels whisper of hope. It's a universal story about all who would stand in deep and deepening darkness but hear the angels whisper, "Be not afraid," because light. It's a universal story about all who would respond, even against all worldly odds, with, "We will follow, and we will go. We will obey, and let it be."
Good people of this Christmas time, consider well and bear in mind and traveled from afar, directed by that glorious star. And on they wandered night and day, until they came where Jesus lay. And when they came unto that place where our beloved Jesus lay, they humbly cast down at his feet those gifts of gold and incense sweet. With thankful heart and joyful mind, the shepherds went the babe to find. And as God's angel had foretold, they did that babe, the Christ, behold. Within a manger he was laid, and by his side the Virgin maid, as long foretold upon that morn, the hope of mankind all was born. And so it is with thee this night, the angels promise hope and light. The star imparts its warm embrace of Christ as born in every face. So Merry Christmas all and one, on this the birthday of our Son, that hope and light all hearts foresee. We bow our heads and let it be.
Thanks again for joining us. Please visit unityinlinwood.org for a preview of all upcoming classes, services, and events, and for an opportunity to make a gift to our community should you so choose. Thank you.